From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Tonight reporting from the site of the European Summit meeting.
Good evening. Here at the Paris Summit on the future of Europe and in Washington as well today, the dark cloud of possible war with Iraq hangs heavily. The Bush administration said here today it was optimistic about getting international agreement, including with the Soviet Union, on the principle of using force against Saddam Hussein. But there is no agreement with the Soviet Union or with the Europeans on exactly when force might be used or under precisely what circumstances. Here's our White House correspondent, Britt Hume.
The second day of this conference on Europe's future was devoted to the speeches left over from the first day. President Bush and the other leaders who spoke yesterday had to listen and listen and listen today. Although it took up most of the president's time, the meeting was secondary to the offstage negotiations over a UN resolution authorizing force to liberate Kuwait. The Soviets have agreed, say U.S. officials, but only in principle. The wording remains unresolved.
We simply cannot discuss any proposed language or approaches while these country-by-country consultations are underway.
The president held one such consultation today with Turkish President Özal, a vital ally because of his country's location on Iraq's northern border.
Turkey and the United States are side by side in this, and nobody has been more steadfast than the Turks, Mr. Özal. So I have no complaints, only gratitude.
Any complaints about the Soviets?
Patient, all will be well.
Indeed, tonight, after a meeting with Secretary of State Baker, Soviet Foreign Minister Shevardnadze, for the first time, agreed publicly with the U.S. view that UN actions so far have failed. And he all but said further UN action is needed.
In its essential elements, the resolutions have not been implemented, and aggression has not been stopped. And this is the main point.
The reason U.S. officials are so cautious in commenting about a resolution authorizing force is they want as many nations as possible behind it first. The greater the unity on the issue of force they believe, the less the chance force will actually have to be used. Britt Hume, ABC News, Paris.
So, here in Paris, even though the Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev said that Saddam Hussein cannot be allowed to bring the world to its knees, the alliance against Hussein is not yet prepared to play the military card. In Washington today, 45 Democratic members of the House of Representatives have tried to guarantee that the military option will not be exercised without the Congress's permission. The 45 have gone to court in an effort to constrain the president. Here's ABC's David Ensor.
The lawsuit filed today asks a federal judge to issue an order forbidding President Bush from launching an attack on Iraqi troops without first getting a declaration of war or explicit authorization from Congress. Similar suits have failed in the past, but these members want to draw attention to what they see as a possible abuse of presidential power.
As a member from the Vietnam generation, when I was privileged to be sworn in as a member of the Congress, I promised myself at that time I would never be a part of any undeclared war.
An ABC News survey of 367 congressmen and senators shows 58%, including some Republicans, believe Mr. Bush does not have the authority to start a war without a congressional vote. The survey shows less than half, 42%, favor military force to get Iraq out of Kuwait if sanctions fail to do it. 21% are opposed. A full 37% of those surveyed are undecided. The numbers suggest President Bush still has some convincing to do. Officials here at the Pentagon remember Vietnam as well. They are keenly aware that to bring matters to a successful conclusion in the Persian Gulf, they'll need public and congressional support for war as a last resort. David Ensor, ABC News, the Pentagon.
Another shipment of heavy military equipment is about to leave for Saudi Arabia. More than 50 shiploads, hundreds of tanks, trucks, and helicopters will start leaving port here in Europe later this week. The lack of tension in Europe makes it easy to move the weapons from here. In Saudi Arabia today, some Americans are working overtime to see that President Bush's Thanksgiving visit goes off without a hitch. There are a lot of soldiers in the Gulf whose morale needs a boost. ABC's Bill Redeker tonight on the effect of all this waiting.
In the early, chaotic days of August, when the buildup was just beginning, there was outspoken confidence.
If he dares come across that border and come down here, I'm completely confident that we're going to kick his butt when he gets here.
But the bravado was misplaced. The U.S. was lightly armed. Heavy tanks were delayed in arriving. American soldiers were dangerously under-equipped. Still, the language of war was, let's get it done, we can do it.
The balloon goes up and we have to fight, they'll fight.
But now that the U.S. has added so many more troops and its best tanks, that early earthy talk about kicking Iraqi butt has given way to more sober appraisals. The long grind has undermined the enthusiasm for war. The prospect of fighting has become more onerous, more personal.
We're all getting frustrated. We're all getting tired. We work 12 on and 12 off, and that's difficult to do.
This part of the world has been at war, one border or another, for 4,000 years, and we're not going to solve that.
Take this job and shove it.
Officers say there is more to the morale problem than the usual complaining. Talk of actually going on the offensive has reminded the older men of Vietnam.
Well, you're going to have the same complications if people start dying. There's going to be a lot of families back home and that are going to have that person come to their door and have to face that death as part of their family now.
After I came back to the States, you know, a lot of times I thought about it. I wonder what those bombs hit, what they did, who they killed.
It's their first day off and almost...
For officers and their men, it isn't so much a matter of fear as of doubt. Doubt about what they are supposed to do, when it will begin. Doubts expressed anonymously, as in the graffiti written on this table.
Never before have so few been led by so many and accomplished so little.
All I want is the same as everyone. Why am I here? And for how long?
Questions that mean everything for these American troops. Questions that only politicians can answer in their own time. Bill Rediker, ABC News, Saudi Arabia.
Another sign today that Iraq is feeling the pressure. The parliament in Baghdad ruled today that anyone hoarding grain of any kind for the purpose of trading it should be put to death. Saddam Hussein was at it again today. This time he said that all the Germans held hostage in Iraq should be released. There are about 180 of them. It is Hussein's way of thanking the German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, who has been emphasizing negotiations rather than force to end the Iraqi occupation of Kuwait. Well, that desire to help Saddam Hussein out of his isolation rather than take him on militarily is fairly widespread in Europe. If there is a war, Europeans have a lot more to lose than oil. An attack on Iraq will inevitably lead to terrorism against those seen as U.S. accomplices. The Middle East has always transferred its violence to Europe. War against Iraq may well inflame the large Muslim Arab communities here. 1.5 million Arabs live in France alone. We know the U.S. has the power to make the Iraqi army collapse in Kuwait, said one French official, but can the U.S. manage the aftermath? That is why the reality of going to war is hung so heavily over this summit. We'll have more news in just a moment. Been in office longer than any other leader in all of Europe, was here for the summit in Paris. At home, her political enemies in her own political party were trying to bring her down. In a secret ballot among conservative members of parliament, Mrs. Thatcher has narrowly failed to be confirmed as the leader of her party. She must now face a second ballot. ABC's Barry Dunsmore is in London.
Could I ask you to comment?
In Paris tonight, Margaret Thatcher put on her bravest face.
I'm naturally very pleased that I got more than half the parliamentary party and disappointed that it's not quite enough to win on the first ballot. So I confirm it is my intention to let my name go forward for the second ballot.
Back in Britain, it is the biggest political drama in decades. And the man who caused it all, the challenger, former Defense Minister Michael Heseltine, relished the fact he will get another chance to unseat the Prime Minister next week.
I am overwhelmed with gratitude to my parliamentary colleagues who in such large measure have given me their support.
The challenge to Margaret Thatcher is not simply because of a squabble in her party. Today's vote only occurred because Thatcher and her policies have become very unpopular with the British people. The riots in April over a new municipal tax under which Prince and Pauper would pay the same amount was but one symptom of that unpopularity. The Thatcher Revolution has brought great prosperity to some, but such basic elements in Britain's welfare state as the health service, education, and housing have all deteriorated under Thatcher. In most polls, she trails the opposition Labour Party by 20 points. This is the basis for many commentators' conclusions tonight that even if she wins the next round, she still loses.
I think we have come to the end of the era of Thatcherism, even if Mrs. Thatcher survives. Her own position in the party, even if she survives, is going to be much more constrained than before.
I think in the long term, Mrs. Thatcher has had it.
Thatcher has dominated British politics for nearly 12 years.
No, no, no.
Nearly half of her own party members of Parliament said today they are tired of that domination. Barry Dunsmore, ABC News, London.
And here is the most dramatic example we have heard in years of history repeating itself with an astonishing twist. Remember the Berlin airlift of 1949 when the Soviets cut off Berlin and the Allies flew in food around the clock to keep the city alive? Today, the West Berliners decided to send the 300,000 tons of food and other emergency supplies they have stockpiled throughout the Cold War to the Soviet Union, which is facing a desperate winter. We'll have more news from overseas later.
It's that process which ensures now more than ever that Europe has room not only for superpowers, but for San Marino as well. Jim Bitterman, ABC News, Paris.